Hello everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. Welcome to this webinar, Creating Agile Organizations, Developing Your Leadership Intelligence. I'm Colin Williams, and I'd like to welcome you on behalf of Sharon Olivier and Frederick Hölscher, and we are your hosts for the next hour. We'll get going in just a minute, but perhaps while we're waiting, you could pop into the chat box where you're dialing in from, where you're connecting from. That would be nice. It would give us a sense of where people are. So we've got some places coming up: Amsterdam, Germany, Ramsgate in the UK, Richmond, Virginia. They're scrolling through so quickly I can't read them. Vietnam, Australia. Wow. Lovely. We've got a really international group. That's a delight. And thank you very much for taking the time to join us for what we hope will be a really interesting session over the next hour or so. So I think we'll get going. We've got a lot of people with us now. So let's make a start.
Yeah, and also invitation, if you do want to use the chat function as we go along, please do make use of the chat, and we'll see if we can scroll down every now and again just to see what people are commenting. We'd lovely to have your interaction as we go along.
Colin, I see the participants are still logging on at quite steep. We are now more than almost 550. And
but we'll get going.
Welcome to Japan.
Okay, Sharon, do you want to?
Yes, let's move on.
Move on. So you've already met us, but this is who we are, and we are members of faculty at Hult Ashridge Executive Education, and we're also the authors of this book, Agile Leadership for Turbulent Times. It was published about 3 weeks ago, actually, hot off the press. And it provides the material really for this webinar. This is where we drew our inspiration for thinking about creating agile organizations. Quick introduction to the organization. So the three of us are based at Hult Ashridge, which is a triple accredited leading international business school. As it says, 60 years of experience around the world, 4 campuses. One in Ashridge, just outside London, which is where the three of us are based, one in Dubai, one in San Francisco, and one in Hong Kong. And we specialize in executive education, both customized executive education for organizations or specific populations in organizations, and also what we call open enrollment programs. And we're part of Hult International Business School, which completes the business school offering with undergraduate, postgraduate, and doctoral qualifications programs. And the whole of the business school is part of EF Education First, which is the world's largest education company. And EF provides a range of language training services in all sorts of different formats, face-to-face and virtual, for professionals in organizations and for kids in various parts of the world, cultural exchange programs, and educational travel. And bringing that together, that provides a really useful combination for executives and managers on developmental journeys. So that's who we are and that's where we're based. This is what we're going to be doing for the next hour or so. We're going to have a look at why it's helpful to think of an organization as a complex living ecosystem in order to lead more effectively. Rather than thinking of, often people use a machine metaphor, we believe that this is more helpful. We're going to take a deeper dive into what we call 3 fundamental leadership intelligences. And we call them intelligences because they are seeing, sense-making, and deciding processes. And we believe that the integration of the 3 creates agile leadership and therefore agile organizations. We'll also be asking you to consider your organization's blend of these 3 intelligences and your own personal blend to think about the implications for agility. And we'll wrap it up after about 45 minutes with some tips. We'll give you tips as we go through, but we'll sum up with some top tips. And then we'll have about a quarter of an hour for a Q&A session and discussion. And you can be popping your questions into the Q&A box as we go, and we'll pick those up at the end. But at this point, I'm going to hand over to Frederick to dive into the material.
Thank you, Colin. It's still fresh in my mind being in South Africa in December, playing in the sea. Oh, I like the South African waves. They are rough and they are strong. And I remember when I was a little child, how these waves quite often just rough and tumble you. You throw you off balance and just brush you onto the beach until you've learned how to ride these waves. And when you start to ride these waves, it is so fantastic. And I was just thinking while playing in the sea again this time, how we find ourselves in a world like an ocean with tremendous storms. And the storms are conveying to us every day when we switch on the TVs, political storms. We have business storms, the division between Wall Street and Main Street. The stock markets are rallying while business are plunging, and on all of those disruptions, not to even talk about the technological disruptions. Artificial intelligence has taken over our world. And then poor Mother Nature. You know, she's really coughing with all the gases that we are putting out there. And obviously, I will be not in tune if I don't mention COVID. I sometimes wonder whether that's not Mother Nature's way of getting back to us, sending her little soldiers into our bodies. But nevertheless, these disruptions is actually creating a stormy sea. And you know what? I often wondered, and that is what we thought about this when we wrote this book. The leaders are called to navigate the ship through the stormy seas. And one wonders to what extent is the navigation equipment of the leaders still intact, up to date to navigate us or the ship through the stormy seas. And that is actually what the book is all about, to find those navigation tools to help us to ride the waves. And as Colin just said, two things. Number one, it is the perspective of leaders on the world and on organizations. How do they see it, as a machine or as a complex adaptive system? Sharon will talk a little bit more about that. And then obviously our intelligences, those things that is unique to us as human beings. Our instincts is not helping us to survive, but it's our intelligence, and that is what we're going to explore. Thank you, Sharon.
Yeah, so as Frederick says, our research that we did, which was actually a wonderful journey, it involved more than 300 leaders over a period of 2 to 3 years in the classroom, but also in organizations all over the world. We observed them, we interviewed them, and we were in search of really, as Frederick says, the navigational tools of how to lead in complexity. And we discovered an important thing, that how leaders lead is often determined by their perspective of how they see what an organization is. And we'd ask leaders, how do you see an organization? And some would say we see it as a well-oiled machine, a strong hierarchy. Many people drew organigrams. They saw clear roles, structures, command and control, agreement, linear thinking. And others saw it more in terms of the picture you see on the right-hand side, as a complex, messy, interdependent networks of teams and people and computers, artificial intelligence, human intelligence coming together in emergent ways around difficult problems, where it isn't so linear, where it's actually non-linear in its thinking. And this is how complexity thinking works. It is a non-linear way of seeing the world, where things that are unpredictable pop up because of the interactions of the types of people that come together in the organization. And we discovered that this mindset, the complexity mindset, was really important for the 21st century leader, to help to see the organization as an ecosystem rather than a well-oiled machine. Some leaders are very comfortable with certainty. They thrive in certainty. They want control. And they often experience anxiety when they lead in this complexity environment. I asked one leader the other day on a program, what does it feel like to lead in your organization? He says, Sharon, it feels like riding an elephant. And this image came to mind. I said, what do you mean riding an elephant? He says, well, I'm on this elephant and I've got a very clear vision and strategic objectives, and I've got my little whip here, and I want my team or my elephant to go there, but it goes left and it goes right. I just feel so out of control because I've got these influential people, informal leaders all over in my organization, bringing pockets of energy. You know, I say something that this is how we should do it, and then there's somebody with another idea that people resonate with, and before I know it, the energy has moved there, and then the energy has moved there. And sometimes, even although that I'm formally in charge of my team, I sometimes feel like I'm out of control. And this is often what it feels like. When we perceive our organizations as complex, we are able to flow with it and be comfortable with the messiness. But if we're expecting it to feel like a well-oiled machine, we will get this feeling of riding an elephant. We were also intrigued in our research to see what lessons we can learn from the natural ecosystems. Our colleague Giles Hutchins wrote this book called The Nature of Business, where he talks about the lessons we learn from natural ecosystems. And I was fascinated. How come the schools of fish and birds work seamlessly without a boss in a very fluid way? Where, you know, I do scuba diving, you just put your arm into a school of fish in the sea, and they just quick movement, and then they all move together again. And going a bit deeper into this, we found that ecosystems have very simple rules, but they have a different set of rules. For example, the fish's rule is stay equidistant to the two fish next to you, swim at the same speed. The birds spotting 7 others and making sure that they stay in unison with 7 others. What are the lessons here for organizations? What are the rules of the simple ecosystems of organizations? One of the big things we discovered is that if an organization has got a very clear purpose, it tends to hold the ecosystem together well. Knowing why we exist, what we believe in, what we stand for, means that you can release the how and empower teams and empower individuals around the how to get there. Just following some simple rules. Make sure everything you do is aligned to why we exist, the purpose, and make sure that you respect your colleagues and that decision-making is collaborative and that you've consulted with the experts in the organization. If you follow these simple rules, the ecosystem can work well. And of course, you need the psychological safety for this ecosystem to work in a more fluid way. This is the essence of agility. Seeing organizations as ecosystems means that you are able to create the psychological system and the safety for people to self-manage around the how. And this is what we found really an important aspect. It led us to consider leadership then as a process rather than a person or a position. If you had to reframe a little bit and say, actually, if you had to see leadership as a process, what would be the essence of that process? And we discovered that there were 3 elements to it. The first is the ability to create a divergent space. And we call that sensing, opening up, a space where you think beyond boundaries, where you can be creative, where you challenge the status quo, you bring big picture perspective into the organization. And this is where the intuitive intelligence comes through very strongly. And then we need integrative abilities, where you bring diverse ideas and people together and you blend. Forums, discussions, thinking together, blending, and that's what we call the integrative thinking and integrative practices. And that's where your eco-intelligence, eco works between boundaries. And then thirdly, that's all well and good, but if you can't close things and bring shaping and form, which is the ego intelligence, you're pretty much lost. So the emergence of the behavior and the culture is a product of these 3 interdependent processes working almost like 3 strands of DNA interdependently: the intuitive intelligence, the eco-intelligence, the ego, intuitive working beyond boundaries, eco working between boundaries, and ego working with boundaries, converging, shaping. So what we'd like to do now is just take you on a little bit of a deeper dive into each of these in the ecosystem as 3 fundamental intelligences.
So the first one we'll look at is ego. And I guess this is the best known, the best understood of the leadership intelligences. It's kind of the transformational hero as it's become known. And it's had a bit of bad press recently, yeah? And that's partly in the leadership literature. We see books like Leading Beyond the Ego, because people have focused on the negative aspects of ego intelligence, which can be quite corrosive and damaging and cause people to feel disengaged. And of course, there's the presence of a a few world leaders who've demonstrated perhaps an excess of ego leadership over the last few years. I won't mention any names, but men with blonde hair come to mind. But we believe that it's time to rehabilitate the ego intelligence in leadership. It is an important aspect of leadership. And to understand why, we need to just go back to the theory of ego stage development. And I'm going to hugely oversimplify here. So anybody who understands this, please forgive me. But for the purpose of the argument, I'm going to simplify. The ego is a central part of our personality. It's kind of our identity. It's how we project ourselves in the world, how we see ourselves. It's a bit like our brand. And in the very early years of childhood, the first ego need is one for safety and security. And that need is met usually by a close association with the mother. As we move into childhood, so the need evolves, and there is a need to feel included, a need to have a sense of belonging, and children conform largely to meet this need. And then we get to the teenage years, and we've all been there, and some of us have had children, and some of you will have children there. And as teenagers feel the need to prove their own identity. They need to be different. They need to be recognized for their own person. And so you get things like different clothes, different music, different hairstyles, in order to meet this need for status and recognition. And then as we move into kind of early adulthood, we get to a level of maturity where these first three stages don't disappear. We retain these needs, but we're kind of in control of, we work with them effectively, and we move to a level of what is known as either self-actualization or finding our purpose or wanting to be of service to others. And we believe that when we get to this level, the ego can be incredibly helpful in a leader. Where it is unhelpful is if that leader's development is interrupted and they get stuck at this level almost of teenage maturity, and then their entire leadership behavior and decision making is driven by their personal needs for status, recognition, approval, praise, and that is unhelpful. But if we get to the level of maturity where we are able to work with what we call a liberated or a benevolent ego, then it becomes an extremely powerful part of our leadership armory. Do you want to click on, Sharon, please? And ego intelligence, we call it the shaper because it does almost physically want to shape things. It brings a sense of boundary, so what's in and what's out. It brings a sense of identity that people can belong to, and it generates loyalty. People feel proud of belonging to something, to a team, to an organization, or to a country. It creates a them and us, which drives competition, and competition can be extremely healthy in terms of generating energy and driving performance. It provides focus and direction. It's a convergent form of thinking, and it's a kind of rational, primarily left brain activity. It develops drive, energy, determination, and leaders using ego intelligence tend to lead from the front. They stand out and they provide guidance from the front. This creates speeds and efficiency. It develops a sense of security, actually. If people feel they can rely on the leader, count on the leader, that the leader is kind of in control, then that helps people relax into things. And a characteristic of effective use of ego intelligence is good, clear communication. So familiar to you, but how might we develop our ego intelligence? I guess the first question to answer is, how are you performing at the moment? Are you using enough of your ego intelligence? Too little? Are you hiding your light under a bushel? Or you got it about right? Or maybe too much? Are you kind of believing that you have to find all the answers, you set the direction, and then you tell people what to do? But if we work on the assumption that this is aimed at someone who is not providing enough ego intelligent leadership, then a few things to think about might be things like plan, be deliberate, make plans and share them, follow through, share your vision and sense of purpose. Don't just hold it, get it out there, communicate it, express it, allow people to buy into it. A simple one, speak up. If you're overly good at listening, then Start talking. Don't hesitate. Just get your voice into the conversation. Follow through. Leaders using ego intelligence monitor things. They make sure that ideas are converted to reality. Show support and loyalty for your team. And use clear and effective communication. Use emotion and facts. And the best use of ego intelligence in leadership provides quite inspirational communication, actually. Some of the great speakers of the world are using their ego intelligence to communicate the power of what they believe. So a few thoughts on ego intelligence, probably the one you know the best. But I'm going to hand over to Frederick now, and he's going to talk a bit about intuitive intelligence and what we mean by that.
Thank you, Colin. Obviously now the intuitive intelligence was the other side, where the ego leader creates a slipstream and inspire people to follow her or him. Intuitive intelligent leaders start to open up the space. And we call it the sensor. Now, intuitive intelligence is a little bit of a stepchild of the three capabilities, because science hasn't got a clear grip on what we call intuition yet. Dana Zohar called it spiritual intelligence. Other people call it some other stuff, and so forth. And in the book, we call it almost like a black cat in a dark room. You hear it now, but you haven't seen it yet. Now we hope that this chapter and this talk will help you to shine a light on your own black cat and perhaps let it out and become of some use. Now, what we mean by intuitive intelligence, it is a different way of knowing, almost a different source of knowledge. It's non-emotional, it's non-rational. It is just that tapping into a source of knowing from all of a sudden, I see it. I see a solution. I see a new opportunity. I always call it almost like it is the intelligence of hope. Not what you hope, because the moment when you shape your hope, then it's the ego. But when you open up the space and say, wow, let's see what can happen here. Perhaps there are new opportunities. That is where intuitive intelligence is at its best. It is those aha moments and flashes of insight. Sometimes some people call it gut feeling. Now, it involves sensing into a situation, as Colin said, and Sharon, beyond the boundaries. You step out of the boundaries, and as it says, some people see things as they are and ask why. Bernard Shaw. Others dream things that never were and ask why not. That is intuitive intelligence at its best. The asking of the why questions. Is open up for synchronous events, stuff that comes your way all the time, and all of a sudden it resonates with you and you say, wow, perhaps there is something. And as we say, it considers the illogical and unrelated events of ideas. You go into a space where data does not exist yet, where beyond facts and figures. Sounds a little bit esoteric, but all of us have got this black cat that meows from time to time. Now, let's look at a few tips for developing intuitive intelligence. The one very important thing is to change that mindset of fear to a mindset of curiosity. Cultivate an open mind, an open heart, and an open will, as Otto Scharmer says. And as I said, cultivate that sense of hope. Create a space of exploring possibilities beyond the usual organizational boundaries, the way we do things here. And could I dare to say, a little bit before you go into the facts and the figures. And learn to express your intuition by using your eco-intelligence, checking it with other people, and asking questions, shape it a little bit, and give it over to the ego to then shape it and run with it. What I quite often do, if I grapple with problems, I just walk into nature. On Sunday, I walked into nature and just tune in to the birds and the trees, just to get my mind silent. quite often I use dreams. When I have a problem, I put a thought in my mind before I go to bed, and amazingly, my brain starts to work. We write about the neurological pathways of dreaming in the book, and how it just comes up with some new idea. Journaling, just write what comes to mind, and obviously meditation. Now, another very important point that we feel in your team is just to open up that space for people to come up with crazy ideas. Let it become part and parcel of your daily activity. It is okay. Let people don't fear, oh, what am I going to say? What will the boss say? Don't throw the ideas with what we call idea killers. We don't have budget. We've tried it before. The customers will never be satisfied with that. No, cultivate it, nurture it a little bit, and until it is big enough to stand on its own feet. So those are a few tips. And then I want to say this last thing, that I like that quote. Sometimes when things seem to fall apart, they are actually falling in place. Create the eyes to see how new things are falling in place. And that is how we cultivate our intuitive intelligence. Thank you, Sharon.
Okay, so I'm going to cover this one in the middle, which is called ECO, the integrator, the one that enables the ecosystem, takes in eco-intelligence. And we've put it in the middle for a reason, because it brings together the intuitive, the ideas, the thinking out there, and the shaper. It's the piece that integrates those two together. So, as I said, we call the eco-intelligent leader, or even organization, the integrative organization or the integrative leader. And these are the leaders that start to see that their role is not, they don't see themselves as the boss or the one that's got to do all the thinking and controlling, but rather than the facilitator of the ecosystem. They know that ecosystems cannot be controlled. They need to be nurtured and enabled. So they see their jobs as the one that creates what we call the compelling context, the psychological safety, where people feel that they can come together across boundaries into forums. And obviously this is where digital platforms today are very important, where they create the right thinking together spaces, very, very popular in a matrix kind of organization, where people come together from various stakeholder groups and functions and boundaries and countries, including clients and suppliers and trade unions, and forums are created around difficult challenges and problems. Teams come together and disband, come together, disband. And they're moving away now from the rigid job description or KPIs, more towards the emergent themes, and always making sure that there's one thing that holds it all together, which is the purpose, the why we are here. And then, as I said, releasing the how and empowering teams to be agile, to make quick decisions, to be closer to the coalface where they make decisions. Eco leaders are very, very powerful in that space. They're facilitators versus them being bosses. So we use the word, they co-sense the future and they co-respond with others. Therefore, they need to be great listeners and facilitators, bringing together diverse ideas and people around difficult problems. So the mathematics of eco-intelligence is 1 + 1 is 3. If you look at those little diagrams at the bottom, you might have the circle way of doing things in your company and the triangle way, quite diverse, quite conflicting. And this is not only gender diversity, cultural diversity, it's cognitive as well, diversity of thought. And often what happens is that you try and fit their ideas into yours. Let's fit the circle into the triangle, or let's try and fit the triangle into the circle. But eco-intelligence leverages the creation of something new, the emergence of new thinking, which is the cone, where the circle and the triangle come together to create something new that's no longer a circle or triangle, but can only be possible because of the diversity of the circle and the triangle, where a cone can be born. So 2 things, they need to create the psychological safety for collaboration, for generative dialogue, and then allow things to happen rather than make things happen. So ownership becomes crucial here rather than buy-in. And secondly, they need to be good systems thinkers. They need to be good with holding polarity, integrating polarity in the organization. So 3 top tips here. As Frederick's already said, explore curiosity. What might emerge if we bring those people and those people together? Let's trust the process. Curious rather than fearful. Letting go your need for control. And then the second one is to create safe spaces and platforms and forums for co-sensing and co-responding, becoming a good facilitator of groups and processes. And then thirdly, enabling or empowering teams on the how they get there, which requires a very strong common purpose or why and what we are here for, and then releasing the how. So that's a little bit about the eco-intelligence. So the three of us came together and we wrote this book, and this is COVID. This is one of the gifts of COVID. It allowed us the space to put this book together in the last 8 months. And it's just, as Colin says, being published a few weeks ago. And we found it fascinating to see how the three of us played the ego, eco, and intuitive role in the writing of the book. Colin, what did you notice in how the three of us came together, just as a practical example of how the three intelligences work together?
Well, I remember the first time we met to discuss it, we were all pretty much in tune with the ideas involved, and we, in our various working environments, been thinking about these things. But I remember sitting down and thinking, oh, writing a book, you've got to find 40,000 words to put on paper. That's quite a big task. And then looking at Frederick and realizing that he was thinking, how am I going to stop at 40,000? I'd hardly got into gear. I'd hardly got going. And that was a bit how things played out over the writing of the book, in that, Frederick was bringing lots of ideas, and I was kind of gently challenging him and shaping and testing, and you were playing a more eco role of holding the two of us together and getting us to listen to each other and understand each other. So that I think that's one example of how the intelligences helped us get the book written, actually.
Yeah, I must say, Colin, I've been in other teams where when I come up with these crazy ideas, I get either just frowns or just a flat ignoring me, or people are brave enough to say that's a lot of nonsense. But I really appreciate the fact that you always brought my ideas to a soft landing. And I must say, only about 10% of what I have about intuitive intelligence is in the book. There's so much more that I would like to share. But, it's like popcorn on a white plate, the stuff pops out all the time. But if it's not held in a container, or if you don't even put, the lid on, the popcorn might just fall all over the place. So I think that was actually great, the way that you specifically, with your very sober and linear thinking, helped us to create eventually a slipstream and put all the wild ideas into the popcorn, although some of them might have fallen on the floor.
Yeah, and the other thing that I think is worth mentioning is that these three intelligences is not only for an individual, but they're also organizational intelligences. In chapter 7 of the book, we write about leadership and organizational culture being two sides of the same coin. You can definitely have an eco-oriented culture, or ego-oriented, or an intuitive-oriented culture, but you also, as leaders, use these intelligences to shape the culture by getting that good blend between the divergence thinking, the integrative thinking, and the convergent. If we use these three intelligences at an organizational level, we can create quite a well-blended culture as well. So that's why we say leadership is a process. It's the process of culture creation. And oftentimes, we find that if leaders have a very, very strong particular intelligence, and it's very opposite to where their organization is, they can feel quite alienated and disengaged in that particular culture.
Sharon, I just want to really emphasize this point. I see some people have made in the chats a question about this.
Yes.
And intelligence is not only, as we say, an individual thing, it is an organizational intelligence, as it were.
Well, yeah.
And that is also where agility is so important, that we want an agile organization. It must have good structures, but also muscles and agility to make sure that we can move on.
Yeah. So in the book, in the last chapter, we offer a diagnostic tool where people can assess their particular blend between ego, eco-intuitive, and we're saying all three are crucially important. They need to work in synergy. But just for a quick poll today, Sophie, let's ask the group, which is the most prominent intelligence in your organization, first of all, and then look at yourself personally. Which would you say is the preferred intelligence for your particular style of leadership? And then which of the three do you feel you want to develop most? So you'll see a little box popping up in front of you now, just answer those 3 questions. Let's see what we have in the group. Okay, so ego in the organizational sense is coming out by far the strongest, over 70%. And our own personal preferred intelligence is more intuitive and more eco. Isn't that interesting? So there I'm sensing quite a dissonance. You know, we're in a very strong ego kind of culture, but you prefer the eco-intuitive way of leading, which often I think leads to frustration and unhappiness and a sense of I don't fit here in the organization.
You remember, Sharon, we had a few leaders that we've interviewed that found themselves in this claustrophobic atmosphere where they had to chase KPIs and objectives and so forth, and yet they've got this tremendous need for opening up the space.
Yes.
And yeah, we wrote a few about that in our book, and that is quite a challenge then for us.
There are the results. A couple of people were asking if they could see them.
Yeah, so these are the results.
Yeah, great.
So ego in the organizational level with intuitive and eco quite equal. And then which one is your preferred way of leading? Intuitive followed by ego very low. And then which would you like to develop? Very strong eco is the skill that we want to develop. And it probably is the most emergent one for the 21st century.
Yeah.
Leading organizations, complex ecosystems. So that doesn't surprise me.
You remember, Colin and Sharon, in the beginning when we wrote the book, even actually way back when we did the research, we first just ignored intuitive intelligence. It was only about ego and eco.
Yeah, initially. And
eventually, luckily, I keep on fighting and knocking at the door, and thank you. So I'm glad that at least it resonates with about 283 people on this program. That we need
a couple of things come to my mind. One is that I think a lot of organizations now are overtly saying they want to develop a more eco-intelligent culture. And I think the COVID crisis has encouraged this as leaders who have a mindset which is based on ego leadership and the need for control have struggled more during the COVID crisis with remote working than leaders who have more of an eco mindset, who see their role as enabling people to perform.
Yeah.
And the second is that, the number of people who actually have said to us, thank you for recognizing intuitive intelligence. I've been doing it for years, but I've never dared speak about it because it's just not accepted.
Yeah. I just want to say, I saw in the chat box, some people ask us whether eco-intelligence and Claire Graves' yellow, those of you are affair with spiral dynamics. That is indeed the case, because we don't want to say that eco-intelligence is not emotional intelligence on steroids. It's not only about an emotional thing and a systemic thinking about things. Obviously, emotional intelligence plays a huge role in that, but it is more than just emotional intelligence.
Good. So we'd like to just three thoughts that we'd like to leave you in summary, and then we'll go into some Q&A afterwards. Colin?
So just pick up, all of us have a blend of the intelligences and all of us have the ability to work with any of them, but most of us have a preference and are more comfortable with one of the 3. And the challenge, I think, well, it's not a challenge, it's an opportunity, is to make sure that in your team, so it might be your own leadership team or in teams in your organization, there is a blend, and that the 3 different approaches are valued. I remember I had a colleague years ago who always used to say, just what I did not want to hear, just when I did not want to hear it. And, I kind of forced myself to listen, and 9 times out of 10, he was right and he was bringing something valuable. So really encourage people to value difference in teams.
And then, of course, for individual development of your leaders, are you giving them opportunities to explore their self-awareness, their blend, and to raise their awareness of their particular strengths and what might be tripping them up, where they're on in terms of their ego development, how they might develop a more eco leadership approach, how they might develop their intuition more through some reflective practices and so forth, offering them a diagnostic tool where they can. So I think this is the whole thing of investing in your leaders to help them to become better blended leaders. And thirdly, Frederick.
Yeah, I mentioned it earlier when I talked about this, and I think this is one of the almost easy way of trying to develop this, is just to open up the space, even in your meetings, your business meetings, even if it's 5 minutes or 10 minutes, just to open up the space and invent people to come up with those crazy ideas. Now, this is not new. We've been doing that with the Bono's hats, you remember. It's nothing new, but at least it cultivates that sense. We take away or can I say, we kill the virus of fear in organization and feed it with curiosity, where people want to listen to others and they are keen. This also resonates to the whole thing of diversity and inclusion. How do we include different ideas into the organization and empower individuals and teams to act and ensure integrative thinking? How do we bring things together? Sharon mentioned the triangle and the circle, and how can we build cones? And I feel that might just unleash the intelligence, not only in the leader, but in the organization. We can even structurally make provision for that.
And one of the CEOs and companies in our research really got their ecosystem to flourish when they started asking, who in this organization are you most likely to listen to and be influenced by? And they came up with 300 names called the sparks, they called them, the informal leaders. And they approached them to start to live and to be the behaviors towards which the organization was transforming and working towards. Amazing how you can get your ecosystem to flourish if you work with your informal leaders. It's called an organizational network analysis. And there's loads of digital tools you can use to do the network analysis. But tapping into the informal leaders and empowering them to simply live and to be and to do things without permission, because they believe what the organization believes in terms of where it's going. And they call that viral change, kind of lighting the fire in a few 300 people within the 7,000 and see how that virus spreads in terms of the ecosystem. So lots of practical things there that you can start thinking about and experimenting with.
Now, this is a metaphor. You can see that I like metaphors. That came to me about when we contemplate this idea. This was initially, we thought this could be the front page of our book. The question is, can caterpillars fly? If you ask this little consumer that wants to eat and use the fat body to climb up the trees and to get more leaves to fly, it might dream of putting wings on its little fat body. That might be the dream. But we know that for caterpillars to fly, there needs to be an internal process of transformation, of metamorphosis that needs to take place. And all of us have got the genes. All of us have got these three intelligences, like the caterpillar. All the genes to be a butterfly are already in a caterpillar. They've just not been switched on. But gradually they start to be switched on, different ways of thinking, and then the immune system of the caterpillar kills it. And then they come again and it kills it, come again. And many of you might find yourself in an organization where the immune system is so strong that it kills all these new ideas. But eventually these cells start to form in little teams. And then they become too strong for the immune system. And as we know the story, then the caterpillar disintegrates and the metaphor of the butterfly starts to fly. And this is why I say it's not just put like reading a book and put the pages of the book as your wings or go for on a skill course. It is something where you really deep dive into yourself and consider who I am and unleash your full potential.
Thank you. Okay, so it's now our time for some Q&A, some questions and answers. And one of the questions, sorry, just before we go on to that Q&A, I just wanted to very quickly mention that this concept of leadership agility and the three intelligences at Ashridge and Hult is being covered in a few of our open programs. And also we do them in a custom kind of development for clients as well. The one is one that Colin and I facilitate called the transformational leader, which is more personal program. It's about your own transformation and how to take your own leadership to its next level of growth, focusing on things like your unique strength, what trips you up, what your blend is in the 3 intelligences, your purpose, and how to really bring about the transformation, the inner transformation that's needed for you to take your leadership to the next level. And that's for mid to senior leaders. And then we've got another one called Leading High Performance Teams, which is for senior leaders who work across teams, leaders of leaders. And that's to leverage the organizational ecosystem and to create agility within the bigger organizational ecosystem, focusing on things like collaboration, high performance across teams, enabling leaders of leaders. And then there's a range of masterclasses, which are shorter 2-hour programs on specific topics like agility, self-awareness, mindfulness, leading in crisis, and then a range, as I said, of custom solutions.
I want to say something about the whole question. I see a few of you talk about what we mean by agility. Now, if you will allow me to use another metaphor, because this is how I like to speak, perhaps my colleagues could come up with something different. But agility is like my body. My body is agile because it's got very strong bones. And these bones give me structure. It helps me to stand up straight. But it also has muscles. And it also has obviously a nerve system. And I think the agility comes by the clever bringing together of, again, this is where eco-intelligence is important, the opposites of structure and freedom. And that is a way that we create agility not by abandoning all the rules and the regulations, but by strengthening them. But on the other hand, to have the muscles to use them for its own benefit of the whole body. I don't know whether, Sharon, would you like to add something to that?
Yeah, there are quite a few people that are asking about how do you create agility when you don't have psychological safety. Yeah. And how do you create agility when you're working from home, in the different contexts that are facing the organization today. And I would say that culture change is not a quick process. And it starts with an OD, intervention where you work with specific teams, helping the leader to raise their self-awareness of the perceptions in their team and helping them with the skills of how to create forums of dialogue where people think together. So I think leadership development plays a really important role to bring people into the sense of what is psychological safety, what are your teams saying about you, 360-degree multi-rater feedbacks to raise the awareness of the leader, that if there's problems with the leader themselves, that it comes into their awareness. But unfortunately, we don't always have success. Some leaders simply don't change. They hang on to their linear thinking, their command and control, and they're not prepared to let go of that. And this is unfortunately what we're stuck with in many contexts, and we somehow have to find a way to complement them with opposites, with diverse people in the team that can bring about a balance so that we can have the ego and the eco-intelligence working together. Colin, I don't know if you want to add to that whole question of agility.
Yeah, I did. Well, I wanted to pick up on the point of what do we mean by agility? And for me, it's simple. It's the ability of an organization to respond quickly to threats and opportunities in its environment, or to respond quickly to opportunities that emerge internally. And this requires, we believe, people to be engaged, to be active, to be empowered, so that decisions can be taken at the right level, and that can be closer to the customer or closer to some other part of the organization. And there's no requirement for all decisions to be funneled upwards to the top and then across and then down and then back up and across and back down again. That whole bureaucratic process reduces agility. It introduces rigidity, I think. And so people have to feel empowered to take a decision, and there has to be enough safety for them to want to take it. And we've all worked in organizations where people say it's okay to make a mistake, until you make it, and then suddenly it's not okay anymore. And I think we need to be clear what we mean. If we're going to say it's okay to make a mistake, we need to say it's okay to make a mistake, but it's not okay to make a mistake because you've been lazy or sloppy or you haven't done enough analysis. So we need to help people we need to be as clear as we can about what we mean by empowerment, what we mean by delegating, what we mean by getting people to increase their personal sense of responsibility so that they understand the purpose of the organization and will take initiative to respond quickly. That's what I believe we mean by agility.
I see, Colin, Sharon, there's a question here, and how can we use or lessen the resistance of people in our organization who have a preference for linear thinking? Now, the obvious question is help them to be more flexible in their own thinking, but that is against their nature. And I think what we said, again, if people have got a strong ego, help the ego to be liberated. Let's show the people how we appreciate the linear thinking, because we always need linear thinking, and show appreciation, but the wisdom on how to apply the linear thinking in the right contexts and when it is called for. And I think that is perhaps what I would suggest that we do to deal with those people. Of course, you can work with their pride, but you can't work with their fear. That's quite often very difficult.
Yeah, and a similar question that's coming out is, how do we master these intelligences when they're so different from each other? Because if I'm a very strong eco leader or very strong ego leader, how do I develop the opposite or the other kinds of intelligences? And we definitely have a leaning one way or the other. And as Frederick says, it's to appreciate the strengths that the different leaders bring, but then to complement them with opposites within the leadership team. And this is, I think, where HR people can play a big role, is to make sure there's a diversity of these three intelligences in the leadership team itself, so that they complement each other. And also to raise the awareness of the whole team of how important the three are and how they play together synergistically, I think is really important.
And there's a question as well about leadership development programs, and the person asking the question says their approach to programs in their organization is still fairly traditional and not geared towards making leaders agile. And they ask us for our take on this, and our take is traditional programs don't increase agility. And the transformational leader program that Sharon's already mentioned is, it's perceived to be quite off the wall, actually. And we put people through a series of experiences, many of which they're not expecting. And we consistently get feedback at the end of the week that goes along the lines that if I'd known what I was signing up for, I wouldn't have come. But I'm delighted to have been here. So I think in terms of leadership development, we need to kind of go below the surface a bit of, it's not just about intellectually, rationally understanding. It's about tapping into the kind of heart and gut of people and providing them with a space and an opportunity and enough challenge to reflect on the assumptions that they're holding about their role as leaders, and allowing them to really rethink that.
I think, Frederick, this question is probably one for you. It says, based on what's been described, does discontinuity come from the sensor or the intuitive leader rather than from data analysis? In other words, is it through data that we have to be woken up and discontinue thing, or more from sensing and intuition?
Well, yeah, you know that I talk a lot about data. I think artificial intelligence and data has become the savior of the day. Now, smart machines are going into quantum computing, etc. But the whole digital way is still very much as what I call an extension of our ego. But to develop our intuitive intelligence, we really need to free ourselves for a moment from the way that data try to anticipate the future, create those linear lines, tracking and projecting the future. So that is where I think that discontinuity, yes, one can obviously program the smart machine to do that, and I think that is what is at the moment the big challenge in our whole way of thinking. As Klaus Schwab said, that the challenge in the fourth industrial revolution is that we have to discover what it means to be human again. And I just feel like our intuitive capabilities is perhaps just that awakening that we can come up with, discover that new intelligence that is beyond artificial intelligence at the moment.
Thank you.
It's a very broad question, which is, what do you think of virtual leadership? Which I mean, that's a subject of another webinar, really. But my view, for what it's worth, is that we can do a lot of very effective leadership virtually, but we need to make sure that our virtual leadership connects at a human level, and it's not just about processes and data sharing and the kind of mechanistic approach to leadership. So we need to find ways of making virtual leadership human. It's more difficult. And one of the challenges that we've experienced in the last 9 months of the confinement process is that the importance of informal connectivity in organizations is now being increasingly recognized. And, you know, because you put a 5-minute virtual coffee break in a virtual meeting doesn't mean you have the same kind of exchange in those 5 minutes that you would have when you bump into someone face to face. So virtual leadership, I think, can be extremely effective, and I think we're getting better at it. We're all getting better at it because we've had to. But I think we need to remember the importance of connection and humanity in virtual working.
You know, Colin, as you talk, I just think that perhaps the fact that we define leadership as a process and not necessarily as a position and vested in a person only, that by means of this definition, it becomes virtual. It is a space where many people can start to step in and create some guidance and create some decision making and some guidance about the future. And I think that again is human leadership versus leadership that is created by virtual artificial intelligence. That's also a virtual decision-making process that actually takes place beyond us. And I think that is where leadership, per definition, I feel becomes very virtual instead of positional.
There's quite a few people asking, how do we create a better blend of the 3 intelligences when we've got a strong ego top team or top CEO? And are there examples of companies that are strong in all 3? In our book, we give one very solid case study of an organization in the insurance industry in Switzerland that we found to be very strong on all 3. And what I often say to leaders is that we can't always change, you know, the CEO or the top team and their orientation. And a lot of leaders at the senior level or mid-level get quite depressed when they say we can't bring about change because of the top team or the top leader. But we noticed in our research this thing of subcultures being quite prominent, that there's a hell of a lot you can do in your own sphere of influence with your own team. You know, some people are asking, how do we leverage more eco-intelligence in the virtual space? How do we have those human moments of connection? And there's so much that one can do. For example, the way you get people to check into meetings, to have a human moment when they check into meetings, where people are budding up and supporting each other on a more personal level in the team, being there for each other, you know, covering each other's back. The ability to create thinking together forums within your sphere of influence, where you bring together diverse stakeholders and diverse people to solve difficult challenges together, and encouraging them and incentivizing them to do things in the way they see fit. We found that even within a strong ego culture at the top, there were pockets of incredible eco and intuitive intelligence happening lower down in the organization. So my advice is just start with your own team. Encourage them to be intuitive, to think out of the box. Encourage them to come, create the forums where people can come together and think together around difficult problems over time.
The ego intelligence in me, Sharon, is noting that it's 13:59 here in the UK. So
yeah, Colin's playing his role.
we're pretty much out of time if you want to wrap it up.
I can just share a very quick one. If we've got 10 seconds left for me, is I see one of the, somebody asked examples. We mentioned a few examples in the book, and there are many, but I remember just to mention one name that is very quickly to mind, the pharmaceutical company Roche. They are really going through a huge program of creating agility in the organization, and there's some very useful thoughts there for guys who are interested.
Yeah, and so somebody's asked about the book as well, that it is definitely on Amazon and all the major bookstores, but it's not yet on Audible. And also, if you want to continue this conversation, we're all on LinkedIn. It'd be great if you could reach out to us on LinkedIn. or email us, and very happy to share and to continue this conversation with you. But from my side, thank you very, very much for your participation. These are wonderful questions, and it was really good to have you all in this webinar today.
Indeed. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody.